Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next webinar. This is the sixth webinar of our series, the Resilience series. Firstly, apologies for a couple of minutes delay due to a technical issue. We were preparing everything in the background, but I'm pretty sure that you'll be enjoying this webinar, so it is worth to wait for these 4 minutes. Apologies again. Okay, all right. So welcome to the sixth webinar of our webinar series that we are running since May 4, and we will continue until June 4. For those who have attended previous webinars, they may be familiar. But if you are a first time that you are joining to this series from the sixth one, no worries about that because we have the recordings of all other previous webinars, and from BSI's website you can reach to the upcoming webinars as well. So my name is Kürşat Yüce. I will be the presenter for your webinar today. We will be talking about building effective public warning and instant response in alignment with 4 different international standards. Dear everyone, firstly, a few housekeeping rules, and I would like to remind you while you are reading this, a few significant ones. Dear everyone, everyone will be unmuted, so unfortunately we will not have the chance to ask live questions. However, what we're going to do is we will be having a 30-minute session, and following this 30-minute session, we will have the opportunity to ask questions to me at any time. So this is how we can proceed and have your answers to your questions you'll be asking through the end. Other than this, dear everyone, you can ask questions at any time here by using our question panel. I will be seeing them at the end of this 30 minutes. But due to this couple of minutes delay, we will be having, I believe we will be starting the Q&A session at around 35 past. Okay, brilliant. So let's move to the next one. So dear everyone, as I mentioned that we will be having upcoming webinars as well, and you will find it from our website. But more importantly, let's go through the agenda. Dear all, we will be discussing about around crisis management, but not only about crisis management, but communication at these times are so significant that it might be even more significant than what you do, what you say. Because in ISO 22361 standard, like some of us may remember who attended these webinar series before, we have mentioned that in crisis management, the significance of leadership is to stabilize the situation. So if any communication goes out with a wrong information that may lead especially public into panic, if a mass of people have been involved in that one, that would lead the crisis to move to a different level. So while we are trying to fix the things, we can break the things in a way that we cannot reverse them. This is why communication is a very significant topic in instant management, response management, instant response management, crisis management, or business continuity management. This is why today's topic will be focusing on crisis communication. So we will first talk about communication instant response, then we will move to discussing about 3 different standards. That will be also a very interesting discussion. We will discuss about standards. I am pretty sure majority of us have not heard about them. ISO 22322, ISO 22324, and the last one will be ISO 22329, which is about using social media in emergency. Okay, so let's start with ISO 22320 standard. Now, a very significant part of this standard, and personally, the part that I find it my personal favorite is these 11 principles. Dear everyone, all these principles have relation with communication. So that's a very significant part and then an interesting and important part of discussing communication. Now, first of all, these are the clauses of that standard. Just to give you an overview, clauses relevant to the 11 principles of instant response management. Ethics, unite of command, working together, all hazards approach, risk management as always, preparedness, information sharing, communication and the methodology, the mode of communication is quite significant under information sharing principle. The other one is safety. This is life safety, of course. Flexibility, that's also quite significant. While I am discussing about communication structure during incident management or crisis management, I will remind you this principle, flexibility, because there may be times that we need to change the mode of communication. For example, in a crisis that you cannot reach the internet, your only communication mode cannot be using internet, using emails, or using other collaboration platforms. So we need to look for alternates on that. Human and cultural factors, that's another significant thing. Organizations who are having diverse structure in means of cultures, in means of backgrounds, in means of other aspects of humans, it might be a little bit more challenging for them, because in a panic environment, when people are having life safety concerns, you may know that even our site is going 70% less than normal. The reason of that is we are not keeping blood and oxygen in our brains like in normal times, because our body is showing a natural reflex to respond to a life safety situation. This is why our muscles are consuming the blood and oxygen within it more than our brain in normal times. So the way that we are thinking cannot be compared to normal circumstances. This is why any word that you'll be saying without considering diversity, different cultures, different backgrounds, may lead to a disaster for the organizations, may lead this incident or issue to be a crisis, or already a crisis one to be a catastrophic one. In fact, this is why human and cultural factors are quite a significant part of these discussions. And of course, as usual, continued improvement. You will see that some of these standards have been published years ago. They are still applicable, of course, thanks to their generic structure, but all of them encourage the continued improvement, continuously adapting to the changing environment of our organization, our country, our world, in fact, in order to respond in a crisis time. Okay, now let's start with a significant part of that. Dear everyone, we will be now staying in instant response structure. Following that, we will be moving to communication with the other three standards. But the first part of the agenda item will be around ISO 22320 standard, instant response standard. So decision making is a significant part of instant crisis management. The reason is we cannot always estimate, anticipate the scenarios. This is why some of us may remember who attended our previous webinars, we mentioned that as well. We are developing business continuity plan scenarios which are not based on specific rules, specific steps, so that they can be flexible to change when the nature of the crisis or incident changes. This requires what? We will be having generic business continuity plans, almost like a template which is not specific to a scenario. And during an incident or crisis, our decision-making capability will help us to fill this business continuity plan or instant response plan. This is why, dear everyone, decision-making is as significant as establishing the structure of the crisis management initially. So this is why we will be first having a decision-making capability, and then we will be moving them into a decision-making structure during the crisis. Decision-making needs to consider lots of different aspects of an incident or crisis management, dear everyone. One of them will be human and cultural factors, as we have just seen as one of the principles. The other one will be extreme psychological pressure on humans. Not only humans who are dealing with the incident, but also people who are assigned to make decisions. As I mentioned, during an incident or crisis, generally, if it is life-threatening one, we are losing a significant amount of our thinking and decision-making capability. This is a natural reflex. Of course, this is something teachable to mitigate that, but we cannot terminate this. Every human will be going through that, more or less. This is why this extreme psychological pressure will be another topic to be considered. Now, the other thing is rumors, assumptions, and misinformation. This is something that we need to manage during the communication, because while you are trying to put the fire out in one aspect, and on another aspect, there will be misinformation that is circulating, which is not helping to your employees or to the public who will be supporting you. So in a crisis management, we can think that on an instant response structure, we can think that organization will be having two hands. One hand will be about putting the fire out. The other hand will be explaining to the society, to public, and our employees how we are managing that incident, how transparent we can be, and also what will be the misinformation that is circulating, especially on social media. Through the end of this webinar, dear everyone, the end of this first session, of this first 30 minutes, I will also discuss about the social media as well. Okay, now we have the REP framework, but before we go through that, we would like to go through a poll question, our first poll question. Our teams will be helping me on that one. So we are now in the mid of discussing the instant response structure. When communicating during an instant, what do you consider the most critical element? Before we continue with the decision-making framework, dear everyone, we would like to get your opinion about the most critical element in your opinion when communicating during an instant. That will also help me to shape my upcoming discussions. Okay, so the majority of us have replied as accuracy and clarity. We also have replied about reaching the right audience. Okay. And some of us also mentioned consistency across channels. Okay, thank you very much for your replies. We will have two more poll questions after that one, dear all. We will kindly ask for your support on this. So the other one is the REP framework. REP framework is quite a generic approach, but again, a good practice for decision making, because just like we are preparing for an instant with our instant management plan, through our audits, through establishing instant management teams, IMTs, or crisis management teams, communication management teams, we also need to prepare, establish, and even exercise a decision-making mechanism. Now, REP is one of the many other decision-making techniques, but maybe the most generic and easy to apply one, relatively. So it talks about these four phases of decision-making. First of all, widen your options. This is why communication is quite significant. We need to get the communication decision makers what options that we have, and if possible, the results of initial evaluation of these options before we make a decision. The other one is the reality. Over-promising in incident, business continuity, or crisis management cases is not working, as we know. So this is why we need to go through understand the reality that's happening thanks to the information that we'll collect through communication. And we need to also assess the sources of information so we can collect reliable information, the right information. The other one is attain distance before deciding. In fact, some of us may know that in crisis management, that's a very significant topic. For example, the senior management is not expected to be in the crisis scene. We are expecting them to manage the crisis, especially the crisis, from a distance, from a different, if possible, physical location. So this is why, before making the decision, to ensure that we can isolate ourselves from this psychological pressure, and if possible, having a biased approach, if we can isolate ourselves, which is about attaining distance before deciding, then it will lead us to a more informed decision making. The other one is a very significant one. During an instant management, a leader might be making multiple decisions back to back, or with some time difference as well. Now, if any of these decisions come out as wrong in some cases, this can lead to another additional psychological pressure on the leader. But if that leader is ready to be wrong, if being wrong is something practiced, exercised, this leader would have the same motivation and the willing to make other decisions without getting affected from the previous ones that did not go well. This is why prepare to be wrong is another significant one. Dear everyone, as you have seen, REP approach is quite a realistic one, quite an easy one to understand, and more importantly, one of the approach that we can train our people before they face with a real crisis or instant that can increase their decision-making capability. By the way, I will be mentioning our leaders, our senior management multiple times during this webinar, dear everyone. Please don't only understand our top management of our organization, because as we have discussed in the previous webinars as well, the leader in a crisis or instant response does not have to be the top management. Organization may determine leaders who are not from the board, for example, which are already designed as part of our crisis management team or instant management team structure. Okay, great. So instant communication. As a power outage happens, we may have multiple options, but we also need to evaluate that. If there is a power outage, we may have limited access to our emails. Even we have generators that are working, we cannot have the guarantee that we will have the internet. Voicemail may not also work. Texting, we may have a reduced time in texting because we don't have power in means of the capacity of our mobile phones. But we may also have the option, thanks to using generators, that we can communicate through external monitors. That may also have its pros and cons. So when the instant happens, in fact, we are determining the mode of communication. So before determining the mode of communication, it makes more sense to determine what to communicate. Just before going through, we will have the second webinar, second poll questions. I'm sorry for that. And then we will proceed with, I will show you what needs to be communicated. Okay. Here comes the second poll question, dear everyone. So before we continue with more detailed, complex topics, we would like to get your opinion about how familiar are you with these two standards. We will be discussing in total 4 standards here. They all have relation with them, but our focus will be on these 2 standards, ISO 22320 and ISO 22324. Okay, the majority of us said, wow, that is great. In fact, I'm happy with this because majority of us said not familiar at all. That's good. One of the purpose of this webinar is also, in fact, spotlight the standards, the international standards, which are not quite obvious for everyone. All right, yes, I think it will stay like that. Yeah, majority of us mentioned that you are not familiar at all. Okay, brilliant. Let's move to the next topic. Dear everyone, here is what we were about to discuss. In the previous slide, just before the poll question, we have seen that there are different modes of communication, and we need to make that decision before and or during the incident, during the crisis. However, a very significant approach here is, before determining the mode of communication, let's determine what needs to be communicated. There are multiple reasons for that, but I will like to share with you one of the significant ones. The principle that we discussed before reaching here, which is human and cultural factors. So the way that we communicate, the way that we are using the words, sentences, how we are establishing them, may be misinterpreted among our employees and among the public and society. This is why we need to determine the right sentences to be communicated before an incident happens. And this needs to be reviewed maybe at different multiple levels until it is confirmed and kept ready for a crisis or incident. Now, here is an example. The communication channel of this statement is determined as text, social media, and or intranet, whichever one is available and applicable at the time of the incident. So we already mentioned this, like attention should be written in capital. A power outage has occurred. There is no issue mentioning what is the problem here. Yeah. So this is something that will be filled during the incident or crisis. This is the area. Officials. So we don't want to provide more details about who are these officials. So we will keep it generic. We will only mention officials have been notified so that we can reduce the pressure on everyone. And if appropriate, that's a warning. We can write it with a different color as well. This location is being evacuated. Or the person who will be conveying that message may not even use the last statement. The rest of the statements are going like that. And these are the ones, dear everyone, that we already determined, we practiced, we used them in our exercise and testing, and we confirmed. This is a far better approach than trying to bring all these words together during a crisis. Miscommunication would lead to an unsuccessful response, may even result with wasting all the effort that is done, like preparing business continuity plans, instant response plans, exercising teams. All these efforts might be wasted due to miscommunication. That's why we need to ensure what we will communicate, with whom we will communicate, when to communicate, what will be the intervals of this communication before an incident or crisis happens. And preparing these templates are a significant part of this response structure. Now, what would our communication management team would look like? This is, again, from both ISO 22361 and ISO 22320 have a list of such recommendation of the teams. And it always starts with spokesperson. Dear everyone, we may have a single or multiple spokesperson, but these are the people who are trained to talk to media, especially, and to other people. Spokespersons are taking a very significant role in the middle of this crisis or incident management, that they need to be the ones who will stabilize the situation. They might be the ones in a position that will provide advisory, if needed, to top management and to the rest of the employees. Other than the spokesperson, who will be the face of the organization or incident or crisis, we will also have head of communications. This is the person behind the picture coordinating an entire crisis management team. This is the person who have gone through multiple exercises before an incident or crisis happens. Dear everyone, the next significant question I would like to ask is, before we continue to press officer, please ask to yourself, if at your organization, if you have already determined spokesperson and head of communications. The other roles may change according to context, according to industry of the organization. However, these two are almost for every industry, every size of the organization. We should determine them before a crisis or incident hits. So we can assign a press officer, Media monitoring structure. This can be a third party or internally, as per your budget, as per your size of the organization. Social media monitoring. Dear everyone, we are keeping the traditional mainstream media and social media separately because the dynamics of these monitorings will be different. This is why they are here mentioned separately, in fact. And the other one is the call takers, of course, and internal communications team. The head of communications will be coordinating all of these ones, but the internal communications team will be at operational level, tactical level, or strategic level. So we cannot assume any of these levels will be receiving the communication from mainstream or social media. We need to establish a structure for these three different levels: operational, tactical, and strategic level, to receive and communicate between each other. Okay. Now, we are moving to the second part of these agenda items. This is the last part before we go to the Q&A session, as much as the time permits, dear everyone. I believe I'm receiving a few questions here, so I will be going through right after completing that. Now, we just discussed maybe a fundamental standard, we can say, on incident management, ISO 22320. Now, we will be discussing three international standards, which are about public warning, color-coded alerts, and social media management. Here are the numbers of three standards. I would encourage everyone here to maybe take note of these three standards, dear everyone, because these are quite strong support for our business continuity, crisis or incident management structure. And these are maybe providing the recommendations to the questions that you are asking already. How can I establish a public warning structure, especially if your organization has a public face? How can I establish or align our color-coded alerts with the international ones? Because speaking the international language in such crisis cases, incident cases, is quite significant, right? So this is why we need to follow an international approach in color-coded alerts, just like mentioned in 22324. And another one of the big questions of this century, maybe, social media management, dear everyone. This is also something that we will be discussing in upcoming presentations. Okay, let's start. We will go with a sequence of these numbers. Let's start with ISO 22322. Now, this is a public warning guideline standard. There are two clauses in it, other than the introductory clauses 1, 2, 3. We have clauses 4 and 5. I would like to have a discussion about the public warning system in a very generic way, just to explain what this standard looks like, in fact. Just before we go, we will have the third poll question, dear everyone. Okay. The question that we are asking is, does your organization currently have a documented social media policy for emergency communications? All right. Majority of us have mentioned that there is no policy in place. And very close to this answer, we have formal practices, but nothing formal. Informal practice, I'm sorry, but nothing formal. A minority of us have replied, yes, there is a fully documented and tested social media policy for emergency communications in place. Dear everyone, I would like to take your attention that social media communication or social media policy and social media policy for emergency will be separate documents. They can be under the same document, in fact, but they will be having separate topics, different topics. I just want to take your attention to that as well. Okay, great. So we can continue with our discussions. Here is the public warning system. Just a reminder, just before the poll question, we were talking about the ISO 22322 standard, which is about public warning. And the very first clause of it, we can say clause 4, the guideline clause, starts with a public warning system. Dear everyone, this standard takes public warning system into 4 different phases. We first need to design the framework. It's just very similar to PDCA cycle approach, but with some differences here. We need to design the framework. We need to identify public warning objectives. That's a very significant part. You may have multiple different objectives for different cases. But what are the purposes for each of these different types of warning that we are trying to reach? Where are we trying to reach, in fact, here? So the other one is implement the public warning process. And the last one is evaluate and improve. Evaluation part may include internal audit, may include exercising, testing, different ways of performance evaluation. And whenever we see any deficiency, any discrepancy from the way that we designed the framework initially, we need to fix that by improving this. So basically, the summary of this discussion is, in our organization, if you see a high risk and necessity for public warning, we need to establish a public warning system. This is a framework that is possible to evaluate and improve. That's possible to test and exercise. Okay, so the next standard is, dear everyone, we will have a walkthrough on these 3 standards. The next one is ISO 22324. This standard, as some of us may remember, it's about color-coded alerts. So this standard provides different recommendations, but you can take it like the internationally accepted meaning of the color codes. For example, danger is represented with red, caution is represented with yellow, and the text is written black on it. Safe is represented with green. Black represents the fatal danger. Purple represents a different level of fatal danger. Like for chemical ones, nuclear ones, they may have they may differ. Of course, that's an initial warning, dear all. There will be also an explanation that will be coming after that. The blue one using the black text is informational purpose. Gray one, there is something happening. Yeah, we can interpret as an issue. We don't know if it's an incident or a crash yet, but we don't have any information available yet. So rather than speaking and writing lots of messages that may cause misinterpretation, there will be times that we'll be communicating with color-coded alerts. And ISO 22324 standard lists examples of them. Okay, now not only this, we have also universally referred color system models. Again, in the same standard, you can find explanations of these 3 different models. There are more than 3, but this international standard 22324 lists those 3 of them. Munsell is a very famous, very well used one in many different industries, especially in logistics, for example. CMYK is basically representing the colors, like cyan, like we have yellow there, etc. RGB is the usual one that many of us may know. Red, green, and blue. RGB is representing that. So CMYK and RGB are the initials of the colors that are used. Munsell is a totally different approach that still uses the color codes, but it is not represented with the colors that is used. Okay, so just to have an understanding about these ones, dear everyone, I would encourage you to go through, have a walkthrough on ISO 22324 standard. Okay, and the last standard that we will discuss today. Until now, in this short time, we discussed 3 standards. Just a quick reminder on them. We discussed about ISO 22320, the instant response, the fundamental standard for this webinar. The next standard we discussed is about public warning, ISO 22322. The other one that we recently discussed, ISO 22324, which is the color code alert standards. And here is a standard, a relatively newer standard, which is about guidelines for the use of social media in emergencies. On the right side, you can see the contents page of this standard. Basically, I can say that it is a larger one compared to other just previous 2 standards that we have discussed. Now, what does this standard talk about? Dear everyone, initially, we need to understand what are the relations of this significant standard. Today, many organizations have been trained against this standard. Many organizations establish a structure for social media use in emergencies. But as I mentioned, not a general, let me say that from a marketing perspective of social media use, but this is specifically for social media during emergencies approach. They already established that one. Some organizations have been audited against this standard as well. So there had been lots of improvements in the last around 5 years since the first version of the standard have been published. This standard has relation, close relation with many other significant standards. What I mean here is that, dear everyone, as an example, ISO 22301 Business Continuity Management System itself can use this standard as a guideline to build, to make the muscles of social media use in emergencies stronger with this standard, rather than we will be building with our own knowledge, with our limited reach. So we have an international standard for that. All other ones, 45,001 Occupational Health and Safety Management System, because it has relevant with life safety. Organizational Resilience Standard 22316. ISO 22322, one that we have just discussed, and 22324. And Crisis Management Standard 22361, we discussed in the previous webinars, and we will discuss in upcoming webinars as well. So this standard has relation with these fundamental ones around resilience, basically. So, as per ISO 22329, what is social media? What is the definition of that? Under clause 3, terms and definitions, we can find it, the very first one. Online technologies and practices that people use to share opinions, insights, experiences, and perspectives with each other, transforming traditional one-to-many interactions into many-to-many interactions. This is one of the reasons, in fact, being many-to-many interactions, we can call social media as unmanageable. So basically, we are discussing here how we can manage in such a complex time of instant crisis, how we can manage unmanageable structure. That's what we are discussing here. But we will not just ignore and let it go as it is. We will have a framework. We will prepare that so that we can mitigate the risk around this. So this definition is, of course, a generic, but let's dive into more into that one. Again, within Annex A of ISO 22329, within the same standard, dear everyone, we have the list of what do we mean with social media. Text message. Many famous platforms today that we are using commonly for text messaging, these are also social media platforms. These can be one-to-one. There are also group functions of that, but they can be one-to-one, but they are still social media. Blogging websites, microblogging websites, the websites itself, social networking sites, photo sharing, video sharing. I'm pretty sure when I'm reading, you are thinking about the famous ones in your mind, right? Podcasts, mapping, and crowdsourcing platforms are even social media platforms, as these two, mapping and crowdsourcing, allow participants to communicate and discuss and, I don't know, data exchange between each other. Okay. Now, the use of social media for corporate communication. Dear everyone, we initially start with amplifying, understanding our interested parties, our stakeholders, our environment, our context. We need to engage our people by explaining the importance of this preparation. And then we need to understand and monitor on which platforms we need to focus, what is the amount of the damage on social media, and we need to support other relevant teams. These can be including individuals as well, like a psychological support. And at the very end, that's very important, at the very end, we need to announce this is misinformation, this is right information, but we are working on it. This is what is happening right now, as much as your transparency would allow. At the very end, we need to take an action and announce and contribute to these discussions on social media. Dear everyone, we have seen many different cases in the near past that social media is not managed well during an instant. And majority of these cases were because organizations want to react to the social media, you can call them rumors or the truthful information, before going through all these steps, they simply announce, this is our opinion, this is what's happening. But this announcement, as you or your organization are under the spotlight, needs to be considered a very significant announcement that may lead a reputation tarnishment for the organization, that may lead the case to be even get worse. This is why it needs to go through multiple filters, multiple people's involvement before we announce it. Of course, time is very significant. Time to respond is very significant. But responding in the right way should be preferred being late to respond rather than coming up with a wrong explanation. Okay, dear everyone. So here are the risks and opportunities of social media. Of course, this is another significant part of that, dear everyone. We should not only look social media as our enemy, we also need to consider that there are some opportunities as well in it. The opportunities that we need to also use are relevant to crisis and instant response management as well. Why? Because imagine that you don't have access to social media. Millions of people are talking about your organization or the case that's happening. There are lots of misinformation circulating in a very fast environment, and you are trying to respond to it. Using traditional media, your own channels only, your own website. It will be quite slow. The reach will not be as big as social media, and people would ignore this quite a formal language and platform. Okay, and the risks are, of course, just like we discussed here, everyone. There will be message that cannot be withdrawn. So once you're on social media, forget about even you delete it in 1 second. Hundreds, if not thousands of people will be receiving and copying that. The other one is followers waiting a response. And citizen journalist. With social media, everyone became a journalist. Of course, I'm not talking about professional ethical journalism, but everyone will be acting like a journalist, basically. This is why they may get response, they may get replies from your organization or people who are working there. They may even communicate misinformation, and they may publish it on social media. And it is going so fast in today's world, dear everyone. Organizations need to have a structure to respond to that. Otherwise, you may do everything correctly, but because of lack of preparation for social media response, again, unfortunately, all this effort that you have done might be wasted due to not being able to active in a right way on social media, using social media in emergencies. Okay. Now, this is from OECD, the 12 good practices. I personally find it quite helpful, dear everyone. It is an open source. Any of us can reach this information from OECD itself. Another beneficial approach from OECD. Now, these 12 good practices are separated into 4 different phases: prepare, detect, respond, and recover. And they are listed under 12 good practices. I would like to go quickly through them. We definitely have a time constraint here. I need to allocate time for question and answer, but I would like to go through reading this together because I will provide a few examples while we are going through these 12 good practices in social media management. during emergencies. Raising public awareness about risks and crises of social media itself. Surveillance, monitoring, situation awareness, and early warning system. So even there is no incident, or there is an incident, but we are not aware as an organization. There may be circulations in social media about us. So this is why we need to have a methodology, internally, third parties, or a different approach that we can collect information from social media, even as an early warning system. In some cases, thanks to social media, we can detect incidents earlier as well. That's another opportunity of using social media. Improving preparedness, very important. So this international standard would help us to have a framework, ISO 22329, while we are implementing an approach in use of social media in emergencies. Under detect phase, there is only one good practice: providing information and warning. Under respond, when we need to react. Improving crisis response through mobilizing volunteers, identifying victims, managing reputational effects, and providing incentives to collect funding and support. And the final one is when we can reach to a temporary level that we can stabilize, we can initiate stabilizing the situation. Under recover phase, learning from the crisis ex post, improving partnerships and cooperation. This is basically there are fixing if we have any deficiencies from these lessons learned following post response, building trust and enhancing recovery management. Okay, now the key aspects of 22329 standard itself are: we have guidelines on post instant evaluation, we have guidelines on timely communication, but what will be the right time? What is too early? What will be too late for our organization? There are such cases that we need to also evaluate. The announcement is correct, but it is too early to make it. So we will let our people to work in the background, and when the time comes, we will come up with this announcement. So it doesn't mean that once we reach to a confirmation on what we will communicate, we need to communicate that immediately. The time of the communication as important as the contents of the message, the template. Engaging with communities, monitoring, because, dear everyone, in order to explain if there are especially rumors, misinformation circulating about the incident or crisis, your voice may not be sufficient. You may need to bring together the other trusted communities, not defending you. That's a very significant thin line. Not defending you, but explaining people the right information, supporting the community, the social media community, with the right information. So this is why not only us, we also need to determine who we can bring together to support our statements, the rightful statements, during an emergency. Monitoring and situational awareness. Situational awareness is something that those who attended previous webinars may remember that we discuss in crisis management, a very significant part of ISO 22361 standard. Managing misinformation as one of the risks that we can face in social media. Inclusivity and accessibility, integration with crisis and instant communication plans. And the final one is, of course, that's part of improvement, training and preparedness. These are the key aspects that you can find in ISO 22329 standard. Dear everyone, we reached the Q&A session. We don't have much time left, in fact, but in these last 7 minutes to complete this entire webinar within 1 hour, I would like to go through some of the questions that are asked. In the previous webinars, we have received quite interesting and strong questions, complex questions. That's the first time I would like to check our question panel, and I would like to share with you the answers for them. Okay, there is an interesting one. What are the most important steps organizations should take before a crisis to make sure their public warning methods are clear, consistent, and trusted? Amazing. I can provide some, not methodologies, but part of the framework that we know. Dear everyone, first of all, as we have mentioned, we need to prepare message templates before we determine the mode of communication. Different templates for different cases, scenarios, but meantime, they need to be flexible. Just like we have seen at the very beginning of the webinar, we have gone through some templates. The location information is not mentioned there. There were some warnings about if applicable for your situation, etc. So we will prepare the templates during the crisis or instant. We don't need to write the entire sentence again. That may lead to lots of other misunderstandings as well, as we discussed, due to human and cultural factors. We will be just filling this variable information with it. This is one of the cases. The other thing is, of course, we need to determine the mode of communication and the alternates for that. Like we need to consider this crisis or incident may lead to a power outage. We may not access to internet. We may not access to our buildings. We may not access to our mobile phones or other devices. So this is why we need to consider different cases and we need to determine the alternates for that. The other thing is, the third step is exercising. Dear everyone, that's a very significant part of that. Exercising does not have to be having a preparation, building a scenario, and having walked through on that one. Exercising can be done through simulation, can be a full exercise. There are different methodologies, different techniques for that one. But also, training can be a significant part of exercising. So training your people, starting from training the people who will be establishing this social media in emergency approach within the organization, training on ISO 22329 standard, then training your internal people. This is the framework, this is what we will follow. So when there is a crisis or incident, this is what you need to refer. This is a significant part of a successful exercising and successful response. Okay. I will try to answer as much as I can, dear everyone. There is another interesting one. I would like to go with the sequence. How can social media monitoring help organizations manage misinformation and protect public confidence during an emergency? Wow, great question. It's a quite generic one, but we have discussed a few things. First of all, social media monitoring, dear everyone. There are many organizations who are providing them as a service, as we know today. That's a very significant and a painful maybe process for organizations. Now, initial thing is we need to determine a framework, just like you have in quality management system, just like you have it in occupational health and safety management. We need to prepare a framework. Of course, what is quite logical is to use an international practice, international approach when you are building your framework, which is what we have just discussed, ISO 22329, and other standards as well, public warning 22322, color code alert 2232224. These are the standards that we can use. So following that, we need to, again, I will come to the same topic, but these are all relevant to each other. Train our people on monitoring on social media. What do we need to check? What are the early signs of an incident? What are the signs of there are rumors and misinformation happening? The other thing is we should not prepare a mechanism to reach to the relevant authorities. That can be also even the owner of the social media, the organization that owns the social media. We should not look for the contacts. We should not look for the right way of communication with these organizations or these communities during an incident. We need to make this preparation beforehand. So as you see, dear everyone, using these standards, implementing a framework is all about basically having a proactive approach before the things go wrong. That's a very significant one, dear all. Managing misinformation and protecting public confidence is not through a single organization. It's a collective approach by other organizations that can support us. And we need to handshake with them. We need to communicate this expectation with them before the things go wrong. This is the importance of establishing a framework that will help you to have a proactive approach. Okay. We have more questions, dear everyone, but unfortunately, our time may not allow that. Uh, just like in any other webinars, dear all, we will be collecting these questions from different participants here, and then we will be having reply through myself, from me, I mean, or our subject matter experts within BSI. We will not be leaving any of your questions without any replies. Okay, uh, we could reply these two questions, and hopefully this webinar, maybe since this series started, that might be the one of the most intense webinars that we have gone through, because we discussed 4 different international standards in this. I would like to thank you for your time, for attending, participating in this webinar. Please rest assured, this webinar will be taken as online as well for anyone who would like to go through it again. So you will have the opportunity to watch this webinar one more time for any parts that are missed. You can contact us at any time, dear everyone. Thank you very much again for attending this webinar. Looking forward to have you in upcoming webinars that we will continue until June 4. Thank you very much. Have a brilliant day ahead.